Hello, everyone. My name is Antonia Levine. I'm the director of the San Francisco Collaborative Against Human Trafficking and treasurer of the International Alliance of Women. The collaborative is hosting this event, and the International Alliance of Women, together with the United Nations Association USA San Francisco chapter, and the National Council of Jewish Women San Francisco co-sponsor this event. Available protection systems and supportive services to fight exploitation and trafficking of women and girls. We decided to present on this topic because one of the most important aspects of the anti-human trafficking work involves prevention, and prevention understood as addressing the situation of vulnerable populations by raising awareness, but also making sure that services and information are available to them quickly and through a good quality service. And on the other hand, we have enough tools and resources for survivors to reintegrate in the community in order to prevent them from being again lured, trapped, tricked into human trafficking. This is our focus today. We'll speak a lot about root causes, who is vulnerable to human trafficking, and then we'll have opportunity to hear about at least 3 programs that make sure that services and information and resources and referral is available to survivors of human trafficking and to vulnerable populations. And now it's my instant pleasure and honor to introduce the president of the International Alliance of Women, Alison Brown. Thank you for being today with us, and you have the floor for opening remarks.
Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. It could even be good evening if you're coming from very far away. I want to talk briefly about the history of treating women as property and something that is easy or appropriate to trade. As I read in Gerda Lerner's classical work, The Creation of Patriarchy, the earliest tablets we have from the Sumerians deal in the price of women, how much it costs to damage a woman, how women are traded for political reasons. Indeed, it's been very easy to take women's bodies and move them to someplace else to service men. This continued for millennia. It is only in the late 20th century that the idea that women are not chattel, but actually whole people, made it all the way into the corridors of power at the United Nations. And I was sitting in a session in the late 1990s of the Conference of Parties of the Convention on Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice, listening to talk about trafficking in weapons and trafficking in drugs. And I, which was possible back then, raised my hands and said, what about trafficking for women for sexual exploitation? And to my horror, the only people who seconded my suggestion were Iran and Sudan, which are not actually my most favored nations at the UN. So when the conference let out, I rushed to the bar to intercept the ambassador from the United States and said, please do not judge my topic by the 2 people who decided to support my request. And they said, yes, I understand. Trafficking in women and children is important, But we can't make just exceptions for trafficking in women, even though as a feminist organization, women were my major intention. And of course, I don't ever want women to disappear under some other topic. But ultimately, through pressure from Vienna, from Geneva, from New York, we got a convention against trafficking in persons. And yet the fact that on the international level, trafficking in women and other persons has been decided to be illegal, that doesn't stop greedy people from trying to traffic women anyway. It goes on in a grand scale. It's a billion-dollar industry. And today we're going to hear more about how we work to prevent it, which should be partially through attitude change, but that is very difficult, and also through throwing helplines to women who have gotten caught in a trafficker's net. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alison. And you started with emphasizing a very important point. More than 90% of the trafficking for the purpose of sexual exploitation is actually trafficking of women and girls. And over half of the trafficked individuals for labor trafficking, for sure, are women, female. So the gender aspect, the gender-based violence, abuse, exploitation aspect of human trafficking is very important. And that is why it's important that we today focus only on the female victims and survivors of human trafficking, as well as vulnerable populations. But we'll have an opportunity to hear more in-depth analysis on vulnerable populations today from Rebecca Cormack. She's a member of the San Francisco Collaborative Against Human Trafficking leadership team and Women Policy Director of the National Council of Jewish Women, San Francisco. Rebecca, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Antonia. Thanks everyone for being here. So just before we speak about all the available protection systems and supportive services that are available to women and girls who are trafficked and exploited, I just want to take a few minutes and kind of set the scene, describe who these women and girls are, or just people in general who are being exploited. So the majority of human trafficking is rooted in gender-based discrimination primarily, and violence and control as well. Gender-based violence and cultural norms that normalize the violence contribute to the cycle of violence against women and thus make them more vulnerable to trafficking. And it's difficult to collect data on human trafficking because so much of it is hidden from the public eye, but there is some data from 2018, which demonstrates that for every 10 victims detected globally, 5 were adult women and 2 were girls. So the problem of human trafficking really varies based on each individual context, but there are some noticeable patterns. The common perception is that trafficking of women and children mostly occurs in the sex industry. And while, of course, we do see many cases of women and girls being sexually exploited, there are also a lot of cases of trafficking in other contexts, such as forced labor, for example. And traffickers will use coercive tactics, so things like deception, fraud, intimidation, threat, and the use of physical force, even debt bondage, to lure women and girls into exploitation. And a person's vulnerability to trafficking is really compounded by other marginalized identities. So those who may be houseless, those who are going through the foster care system, people who drop out of school, immigrant women and children, people of color, LGBTQ plus people, People in these identities are more likely to be trafficked. Generational trauma, historic oppression, discrimination, and other societal factors and inequities have unfortunately fostered these types of communities' vulnerabilities. And so traffickers will recognize this and take advantage of these certain vulnerable populations. So traffickers can easily recognize if someone has an unstable living situation, if they have a history of domestic violence, if they are part of, or if they grow up in a household where one or both parents have a substance abuse issue. Maybe there's a youth who is a runaway, or someone who is involved in the juvenile justice system. Immigrants, again, like I said, people who are facing poverty or just in dire needs, and people who have history of sexual abuse, people who are themselves addicted to alcohol or drugs. The list goes on. So poverty is a huge form of vulnerability in itself, and victims of human trafficking often come from a disadvantaged economic position. So gendered poverty in particular, and a lack of just employment opportunities in general, and a lack of control over financial resources are factors that can exacerbate the vulnerability of women and girls in particular to trafficking. So that's just a very broad overview. I have some interesting links that I can post in the chat that give you more like nitty-gritty data. But again, because it is kind of a hidden thing that goes on in the world, the data is not reflective of the entirety of trafficking because it does go on so much more than we even know. But if you have any questions, please feel free to put those in the chat as well. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. And now we're going to move to presenting some service networks and system for support of survivors. But first, I wanted to ask all of you here in the meeting, can you please raise your hand if you represent a country in Europe? Let me try to see. So it would be great if you raise your hand electronically so we can see how many are from European countries. 1, 2. Well, 2 people. Great. Okay. How many are from Africa? So 3 from Europe. How many from Africa? 1. Okay, we have Africa represented. How many from Asia? Well, no one from Asia. And how many from Latin America? 2. How many from Northern America? Oh, great. We have most of the world represented here. And I hope you will follow up with questions or comments about the anti-human trafficking work in your areas. And now I'm pleased and very honored to invite Caroline Turrell, founder of Refolder, to speak about the countywide gender impact assessment program, introducing the practice of gender mainstreaming, training, of the city departments and policy work. Caroline, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Antonia. It's so good to be here today with you all. Happy Women's History Month and CSW 68. A special hello to my Swedish friends. I'm now based in the US, but I grew up in Stockholm, so it's good to see Europe represented. As Antonia mentioned, my name is Caroline Toren. I run a small consulting firm that specializes in gender mainstreaming and capacity building. And for the past 3 years, I have had the great pleasure of working with Chanel Smith, who you will hear from shortly, and the Los Angeles County Women and Girls Initiative on designing and implementing a gender impact assessment program. So as Antonia, Alice, and Rebecca, as they all have mentioned, well-designed social protection system and services is really key in order to address poverty, in order to advance gender equality, in order to address today's topic, preventing and responding to human trafficking. And so what LA County has done over the past 3 years is to really look at its operations, try to truly inform its operations to become more gender responsive by introducing the practice of gender mainstreaming, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. It's a standard methodology used by the United Nations, governments around the world, big multilateral organizations. And so we have really tried to leverage all those best practices and implemented them at the local government level in the US. And so with that, just to kind of help set the context, while I will address today's topic from a more holistic and whole of government perspective, Chanel will speak more towards LA County's more targeted initiatives to prevent and address human trafficking. So how does this all come about? In 2022, Los Angeles County all-female Board of Supervisors passed what is called the Gender Impact Assessment Board motion. In this motion, it serves as the county's key methodology to impact CDOT. And I can't tell you how grateful and how excited we are to have a board that champions this and that put this in place. We would not have come this far without them really championing this board motion and this cause. And so what the GIA motion, as we call it, what it does is that it asks all county departments to assess gender gaps and define clear gender equity goals, strategies, and metrics. And to do this efficiently, they also task departments to collect and assess gender disaggregated data. So what has Chanel and I, what has the Women and Girls Initiative done in this regard? We really saw our job as helping to set up the departments for success, helping them to implement and comply with this board motion. So we created the Gender Impact Assessment Program with the goal to build our county department's capacity to apply an intersectional gender lens to how they design, implement, monitor, and evaluate their internal processes, but of course their policies, their programs, and their services. And by April this year, we will have coached all 39 departments and helped them to define clear gender equity goals and strategies and to address some of the gender gaps that they have defined and that we have helped them to discover. And to do this kind of efficiently, what we did was we divided departments into different cohorts so that they would work together, learn from one another. And we worked for them for a 3-month period where we provided coaching on a bi-weekly basis. And our curriculum, it focuses on 5 key priority areas that our Board of Supervisors have decided. And in addition to data collection, it focuses on what we're talking about today, external services, workforce, leadership, and family-friendly policies and practices. We often get questions about accountability. Are you really getting things done? Who is reporting on this? And so on. And what we did, and Chanel should have a lot of credit for this, as we designed the board motion and worked with leadership, what we did was that we made sure that the reporting process was streamlined into the county's standardized reporting process. It's standard performance evaluation. So this means that each year, all departments, they must submit a progress report on how they are doing on their gender equity goals to the Board of Supervisors. Now, for the last piece of my remarks, I want to touch on another area we always get a lot of questions about, and that is, of course, systems changes and outcomes. And so while we're still early in the implementation phase, we have worked on this for about 2 years, we are deep into the systems changes. So really trying to strengthen our processes to make sure that they are gender responsive and they are informed by data disaggregated by gender. And so one key area is, of course, data collection. I'm sure you often see the United Nations, they report on the global gender data gap, the lack of gender indicators as it relates to the Sustainable Development Goals. And so the county was really keen in wanting to make progress in this area. So as a result of the GIA program, we have all departments, they have defined strategies to really strengthen their processes in this area. And this could mean streamlining the data collection for their various programs and services, updating their intake forms, starting to conduct more cross-analysis of different socio-demographic factors. So that's been a key area where we see systems change. Another one is, of course, better informed assessments, which leads to better designed program and services. And so we are working with departments to really help them consider how do gender norms and gender roles impact the clients that they serve, their needs, their experiences, and their opportunities. And so whether it regards sports activities, access to STEAM activities, access to health services, career coaching, workforce trainings, we are working with them to make sure that we are understanding who benefits and who doesn't. What are the barriers to accessing some of the county's the county's programs and services in this area? And when it comes to impact, I'm so excited to share with you all that as part of this process, we are now seeing more than 11 departments that are expanding, launching, or improving programs and services that are specifically catering to women and girls. The very last item that I wanted to touch upon is workforce. The county has a 150,000 plus strong workforce. And as we have that as a key priority area, we're really looking to make sure that we help increase the gender diversity in the workforce, and especially in job categories where we see gender imbalances. And I want to share this because I think we all know the importance of having diversity in decision-making processes and around the table, making sure that client survivors are consulted and engaged in decision-making processes, how important that is in order for us to really design impactful programs and services. So when it comes to systems changes in this area, the county departments have made plenty of progress. We are seeing strides where they are standardizing regular assessments of workforce data by gender. So they have that front and center where they see gender imbalances in their workforce. Another area is that they're updating all of their recruitment and marketing materials to ensure that it's gender neutral so that everyone can see themselves in these different roles. And then one strategy that we see many departments implement that I'm excited about is creating feeder positions. And so these are positions that don't necessarily have the same criteria when it comes to what type of graduation you need to have, or criteria relating to what type of exams you need to have in order, again, to kind of increase access to opportunities. And although we are still, again, early in the process when it comes to impact outcomes in this area, departments are already reporting that they see an increase in gender diversity among applicants and hires to positions and role in traditionally male-dominated fields, with some departments seeing increased gender diversity among their executive leadership as well. So I know that was a mouthful, but that is kind of an overview of the program, how we're working very systematically to make sure that, again, the use of gender impact assessments is mainstreamed in all our departments and their operations. And Chanel, please chime in, add if I missed anything, and if not, I will hand it over to you to speak more about the target initiatives that the county has in place.
Great. Antonia, it looked like you were about to speak. Yeah, you were muted.
Sorry about that. Thank you so much, Caroline. Very important lesson. In order to be successful with services and any action that we are going to undertake to help survivors or vulnerable populations, we need data, we need analysis, we need to know the real situation, and this is how we usually work in the different counties. But LA County is a great example how well they started from gender based or with gender lenses research to address those vulnerable populations and identify discriminatory or policies or procedures or where help is needed and change is needed. And then now we have the owner, Chanel, to explain to us how the real programs that were born after this analysis and considerations, how they play in the LA County. Chanel, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Antonia. My name is Chanel Smith. I'm the Executive Director for the Women and Girls Initiative of LA County. I just want to thank all of my fellow speakers for the amazing work that you are doing. Thank you, Caroline, for kind of giving the framework for our GIA project and how that helps keep people from being vulnerable. Rebecca, I really appreciated you speaking about kind of the vulnerabilities that play into trafficking and what makes women in particular incredibly vulnerable is kind of the economic disparities that we see. I think that when we're talking about trafficking, sex trafficking obviously affects women, I think more than labor trafficking does, but to remember that trafficking as a whole is it's a commerce business, right? That it is the sale of human beings for good as a good and a service. And so it really does have to do with economics. And so programs like our GIA program are designed to be able to help women have more economic security, which in turn makes people less vulnerable. So that makes women less vulnerable, it makes their children less vulnerable when there are strong economic support systems that are at play wherever it is that you're living. I did want to talk a bit about some of Los Angeles's human trafficking specific programs. So Carolyn and I work for Los Angeles County. Both of us in a past life had the privilege of working for Los Angeles City. And just for those of you who don't know, LA, which is a very, very large place, and our political structure is broken down between the cities and the counties. But when we were at LA City, we both had the privilege of working on the first dedicated human trafficking shelter that exists in the United States. So typically, when you are in California in particular, if you're a survivor of trafficking and you need to go to shelter, you are placed in a shelter with domestic violence survivors or with sexual assault survivors, sometimes in homeless shelters. While there is a Venn diagram for the type of abuses that people suffering in all of those areas, people who experience human trafficking to have a unique set of needs that sometimes your service providers that are specific for domestic violence or sexual assault are not trained in, right? They don't have the specific skill sets that are necessary. And so Los Angeles City saw that that was really necessary. They worked with an agency CAST, which I'm sure that a lot of you in this space are very familiar with, to open up the first dedicated emergency shelter. So if somebody is arrested, or their trafficker is arrested, or they themselves are just trying to flee a situation, they have a safe space to go. They also have a secondary shelter that people can live in for up to 24 months, I believe, that helps with kind of reintegration and job placement, education, and all of those kinds of wraparound services that are necessary in order for somebody to really be able to thrive in society. Another thing that the County of Los Angeles has done, Caroline mentioned that we have a workforce of about 150,000, a little bit more than that. All county staff are required to take a human trafficking training. So as soon as we start work, we have a training that really outlines what trafficking is, how to look for it. And that becomes very important because we have several different jobs in the county that are interacting with people who might be victims of trafficking. You know, we don't think about our inspectors who are going into restaurants, or who are going into massage parlors, or who are inspecting construction sites, right? And so it's very important that we teach them the signs to look for, as far as if somebody is working in those spaces, or we believe that they're working in those spaces, but in fact they are being trafficked. So that was the county's thought on how it is that we can build capacity through our men's workforce to identify trafficking and then to be able to connect people to resources. We have a court diversion program called Star Court that is for if someone is arrested for prostitution and they indicate that they are a victim of trafficking, they are diverted and they are rather from our criminal justice system into supportive services, which is really, really important because we, as I'm sure everyone here knows, there are many people who are sitting in jail currently who are victims of trafficking or victims of kind of things that their traffickers made them do that now have criminal engagement, or that are now having to engage with our incarceral system. We work very strongly with our law enforcement providers, our sheriffs and our LAPD departments, in partnering them with CBOs, or community-based organizations, that are trained specifically to work with trafficking victims. And so they will call them out to the scene where someone is being arrested for prostitution, so that on the scene, they can receive resources, they can be connected to somebody who understands their situation, and they can never see the inside of a jail cell. So we have, in addition to kind of our court system, we are also working with law enforcement to be able to divert people from ever being arrested and to make sure that they are connected with those kinds of services. Healthcare workers, fire departments, the county has really tried to look at trafficking as holistically as possible. Like, what areas are our responsibility as far as supporting our survivors? And that isn't just by being able to provide shelter services, that is one of them, but shelter services, being able to divert from criminal justice systems, being able to provide appropriate medical care, being able to ensure that people are getting job training so that they are able to go into legal means of supporting themselves, and so that they are less vulnerable to traffickers in the first place. So that is just kind of a bit about what it is that we're doing in LA County. Again, I want to thank you all so much for having us here. Antonia, back over to you.
Thank you so much, Chanel. Great work there in collaboration, and also based on real data and analysis. Thank you again. And let's go now a little bit global and look at an issue that is associated. It's much broader, but it's heavily associated also with exploitation and human trafficking of minors. And we're very pleased that Mary Steiner, the ex officio president of the United Nations Association USA San Francisco chapter, and current board member of the organization, to present on child marriage and what the global and California efforts are in the field. Thank you so much, Mary. The floor is yours. You're muted.
Thank you for including me. It's really an honor to be among so many international leaders here in the area of human rights, specifically rights of women and girls, but also children. And it's because of you that I'm inspired to go global. The issues we face in San Francisco and the US are related to what's happening globally and do relate to how international human rights laws are being enforced, are actually created. And so as many of you know, child marriage is slow in being eliminated. According to UNICEF, an agency of the United Nations charged with protecting the rights of children, the advancement of the elimination is it's been reduced to 1 in 5 adults living today have experienced child marriage. About 10 years ago, it was 1 in 4. At the rate that we are advancing, according to Secretary General Antonio Guterres of the UN, it will be 300 years before we annihilate it, or that we have gender equality. The UN, 193 member nations, have all agreed unanimously to gender equality by 2030. Well, as you can see, our progress is slow, but it doesn't mean that it's out of reach. So marriage before the age of 18 is a fundamental violation of human rights, and many factors place a child at risk for marriage, and we've heard some of those, most explicitly poverty, and the whole theme of the CSW 68 conference. We thank UN Women and the UN for sponsoring this platform. And as we know, these norms are ancient. They go back to Europe when royalty forced their children to marry, to protect national sovereignty. And they are ancient in all the continents of the world. So how to educate and help other human beings to understand why it's so important to provide a child with the rights to be adequately prepared, to be sustainable, independent adults. We know that it requires education, requires family support, and freedom of discrimination, a number of other factors. So there is data, but agreed, it is not standardized, and some of it is questionable. How do we monitor child marriage is a big issue being addressed by this conference. And it doesn't always include just girls. Boys are being trafficked or being married, but not at the rate that girls are being married. So it compromises a child's development, and it affects women. And as we know, it causes post-traumatic stress syndrome and many severe health conditions, such as fistula, endometriosis, and so on. And we know that it puts her at risk of domestic violence, and that is costly to our communities. So in San Francisco, we adopted the Convention to eliminate all forms of discrimination against women. Our nation has yet to ratify it. We are the only developed nation not to have done that, but we're working on getting our nation to adopt it. Republican presidents, Democratic presidents have all been for it. It's just stalled in our Senate Foreign Relations Committee, but it prevents us from participating on the UN Committee on CEDAW. We are further prevented from participating on the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child. We are the only member nation not to have ratified the rights of the child. So we've been a party to many other international agreements. There are international laws that would protect girls, especially from child marriage. The convention, as I said, to eliminate all forms of discrimination against women has Article 16, which specifically speaks to the betrothal and the marriage of a child. And it shall have no legal effect, and all necessary action, including legislation, and should be full context recognized under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. All of this is connected to the UN Charter, which was ratified, or it was created, and is an international treaty binding all member nations. So where are we now? Well, we are now experiencing an erosion, actually, of the recognition of human rights globally. And we continually have to support such agencies as UNICEF and UN Women to see that these international laws are fully implemented, not just internationally, but here in our local communities. That's the next challenge, to appreciate what they mean. So we're really making progress, we feel, here just in California. We discovered that we are one of 6 states in the US that have no age for marriage. So it allows girls, boys to be trafficked here to the US for so-called marriage or cohabitation. We're working to change that here in California, but also, again, to work nationally. So we're so grateful that our president of UNASF, Ashley Ravichet, has been in Geneva consulting with the UN CEDAW committee about how we here in the US can leverage what CEDAW has done for other nations. Of course, we're aware that other nations have ratified CEDAW and the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and have yet to really adequately enforce those treaties. And that's where our role as American women comes in. Once we have ratified, we can hopefully work with the rest of you to make sure that these treaties are actually protecting our children. So I yield to the rest of you. I know that I see several in our meeting who are even more expert in the area of international law. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary. Such an important point. If we had CEDAW ratification, many of the weaknesses and challenges that we have would not be there for the American group here, working on not only on human trafficking, but also on children and women rights more generally. And I'm glad that Los Angeles is giving us an example of doing most of the analysis and data collection and then planning that would be done under the CEDAW evaluation mechanisms had we had CEDAW ratified. I know you're leading the Ratify movement together with Ashley Ravichet and the United Nations Association in San Francisco. And this is a good way to really force the work on and move on quickly on the work on ratification of these 2 important instruments. Now I want to move to an important part of our presentation, and it addresses the need of making our services, our support system accessible to both those in vulnerable populations, and especially to survivors of human trafficking. And this isn't an easy job. It sounds, well, we just refer them to services, but it requires a lot of planning and very strong collaboration and information exchange between organizations on the one hand, community-based, faith-based groups applying advocacy, and on the other hand, law enforcement and government agencies that also provide service or benefits to survivors of human trafficking. Europe is leading in providing a good model of referral and accessibility of services to survivors of human trafficking by developing the so-called referral mechanisms, which are national and then plugged into a broader network between the European countries and some countries candidates for members of the European Union or neighbor countries of the European Union, which allows a victim not only to be referred a survivor between the agencies and nonprofit service providers within certain country, but also to be repatriated by making sure that safety and help and service and protections will be available for that victim and secured even before the repatriation of the survivor. In the United States, the federal government has long now, several years, supported with funding and guidance counties and states that choose to opt to referral system under our terminology here. And it's not clear how many already developed such mechanism, but in San Francisco Bay Area, our goal has been to have in place such mechanism, and we achieved that through the San Francisco Collaborative Against Human Trafficking work on coordination and providing a platform for networking between the organization. And the result is the San Francisco 24/7 Human Trafficking Hotline, which puts together all our resources and works under a referral mechanism protocol that we developed in a multidisciplinary group to make sure that it serves all these agencies and especially the survivors that they try to accommodate with service. I know that Rebecca will post in the chat a link to the hotline information and also the number of the hotline for those of you who are interested. I want to say a few words about the way we organize the services and the way we make them accessible in a very confidential and also emotionally supportive way. The most important line probably would be to let you know that we made sure that both the development of the hotline and now the operation of the hotline are survivor informed, which means that survivors participated in the team that developed our protocols and now participate in either assisting and advising role or directly in the operation of the hotline, meaning the serving of the cause of survivors and community to the hotline. This gave us an opportunity to make sure that our work is victim-centered and trauma-informed. And then we trained all our advocates on the hotline with over 70 hours training, 40 hours human trafficking caseworker specific, which gives our hotline the status of confidential resource because our communications on the hotline with survivors are covered under the privilege as privileged communications under the evidence code. And then we have the additional 30 plus training on hotline specific protocols and practices and victims of crimes protocols and status and resources and so forth. We developed an extensive database of resources, not only survivor of human trafficking specific, but also including information about services for victims of domestic violence, children-specific services, immigrant-specific services, suicide, generally violence-specific services. And they are organized by service, long-term housing, shelter, safe space, food and clothing, mental health care, healthcare separately, case management, and legal services, of course, divided in several categories because depending on the aspect of legal help. We have special resources for children and referral to services for children. And of course, special communications and venues to communicate with the law enforcement. We also refer to the national hotline. We don't turn away anybody, even though this is a hotline for survivors and community in the Bay Area. We would not turn away any person calling to the hotline, and we'll just refer them to the national hotline if we don't have resources to refer them to in the state where they are located. In addition to that, we provide interpretation of over 240 languages for survivors that and callers that cannot speak English sufficiently through the use of language line translation services where needed. So I will stop here. I can speak days about our anti-human trafficking work, but I really want to hear your questions and maybe comments. Feel free to also tell us about other resources that you want to make known and put the information in the chat. Please take the number of the hotline and make it part of your notes and post the phone number in your resources as well. And while you're preparing your questions, I want to acknowledge the members of the International Alliance of Women. In addition to the president, we have several representatives of the Alliance here for the strong support of our events and our work, and for their exceptional participation this year in the Commission on the Status of Women 68 session and the NGO Forum. I want to acknowledge here the president of the National Council of Jewish Women, also here today with us, Dina Gardi, and our vice president and many times past president, Linda Kurtz. and just say that they were instrumental in the creation of the founding of the San Francisco Collaborative Against Human Trafficking, an agency, a coalition of over 70 agencies, nonprofit, community-based organizations, faith-based groups, advocacy groups, educators, legislators, and law enforcement agencies and government agencies on both federal and local level. An impressive coalition, but I know the idea came from a group of established prominent women leaders, and Linda and Dina are part of this group. And it wouldn't happen but for the goodwill and the idea that they had. And it's because the National Council of Jewish Women, not only in the United States, but internationally, pioneered the work on human trafficking, especially focusing on the faith-based community and the immigration during the First and Second World War from Europe to the United States, just in the reverse of what's happening today. So by these acknowledgements, I am going to our chat. Is there anybody that wants to raise hand and ask directly their question? I see a comment from Jacqueline. California is one of the few states that provide cash, food, and medical assistance to survivors of human trafficking who do not have legal immigration status. This is a great comment. This is true. In addition to the federal benefits, which require a victim to be certified in a special way under special procedure, and this isn't a very easy job. The state of California provides benefits to survivors, including to those that are undocumented in the country. I see that Ursula has a question, and after her, Janina also has a question. Ursula?
Thank you very much. I congratulate you for this wonderful event we have today, and I feel a bit like back in the United States. But now I'm talking from the view of Europe, and I was really impressed about all the services you are providing, and I just wanted to know how much is done on a private basis, be it financial and personal resources, and how much is the contribution of the official authorities. I have a feeling that there is much more done on a private basis here in California. If I look on the other hand at Europe and Switzerland, I think the main efforts in this area are done by the government. But of course, we also need a lot of additional help by the benevolence and NGOs.
Well, thank you for this question. I will respond quickly about the hotline and collaborative work. So our work on the design of the hotline, so I would proudly say our work on the hotline was fully funded by government funds. And the design of the hotline was done under a grant provided by the Department on the Status of Women. And now the operation of the hotline is funded under the Governor's Office of Emergency, CalOS grant, as second recipients. And our first recipients and direct donors are 3 nonprofit organizations that work to provide service for survivors of human trafficking: Justice at Last, Safe House, and Missy.
Thank you.
And then I hope that Caroline and Chanel can also clarify about their funding. You're
Yeah.
muted. Oh.
Oh, can you hear me now? Sorry. Still haven't figured out the mute button. Our funding is similar to San Francisco's. It is all funded entirely through government funding. However, for the cities of Los Angeles, the shelters, that originally the space was donated from a philanthropist, and then subsequently the city was able to buy a building to support one of the shelter operations. So I would say the majority of that funding comes from government dollars, as does our funding at the county for our trainings, and kind of that supports with the gender impact assessment, but also our trainings that relate specifically to human trafficking. Those are also all funded through our kind of general fund, which is tax dollars that come into the county.
Thanks so much for your question, Ursula. It's a very important question. It's one of the questions that the TIP report asks countries to think about their human trafficking activities, because one of the requirements of the international convention and protocol is countries to prove that their governments invest enough in the anti-human trafficking work. So it helps that we are now included, the states of the United States, in the report. It encourages our governments. Yanina?
Yes, hello, hi everyone that I couldn't see before. My name is Yanina Lipara, and I would like to ask 2 questions, one to Mary and another to Caroline. For Mary, I would like to ask, because it gets very close to me. I work on the CEDAW Convention implementation in the beginning of my career. So I would like to know if there is a timeline, a concrete timeline to share with us about when in the parliament they are thinking to actually discuss this and approve it, fortunately soon. And also for Caroline, I would like to ask if this project that you are implementing, are you able or have you received any proposals to replicate it also in other states, or is something that you think that it would be in the future possible? Because it sounds like it is very promising also for others to replicate your efforts. So that was that.
Who wants to start first? Mary?
Could you repeat the question again? The timeline for the United States, was it? Or
yes,
the
if you have a concrete timeline or an expected timeline or a hopeful timeline to know in which time the parliament seems to address the implementation of the CEDAW Convention approval, ratification.
Oh, there's no public timeline, and it is reliant on a civil society movement. And this movement has been building over 40 years. As you're aware, there are many women's organizations, very active women's organizations in the United States. But coordination and expertise and working with policymakers has been difficult. Now that we have social media, and now that the Ratify movement has been formed by the United Nations Association San Francisco, we are providing a platform, monthly meetings featuring speakers from all the various backgrounds to make the case for ratification of CEDAW and the Convention on the Rights of the Child. At the moment, CEDAW is the top priority. So we do not have a timeline, and nor does Congress. As you're aware, we have elections coming up. So it's depending on who is elected president, but also who is elected to the Senate. It requires a 2/3 vote of the Senate. And we now are looking at our activists in all 50 states. And we are filling in the states where we need some activism. So we go, and we're making incremental progress. We've just last year gotten Santa Clara County, a very large county with San Jose, Palo Alto, so forth, to accept and adopt principles of CEDAW and a very strong ordinance, and that's a law, and that with a plan. We also supported the San Diego County Board of Supervisors, and another very affluent, highly educated area in California. They've adopted a very strong plan. You're welcome to look at our recorded event on the 12th on the platform, and it's on our United Nations Association San Francisco Facebook page, where we report what it took to get those ordinances adopted. Also, we are happy that Washington, D.C., which is really not a state, it's more like a colony, got Congress to let them adopt an EDAW, which is simply the principles of CEDAW. Again, Fairfax County, Virginia, these are powerful power broker areas. So we are getting requests from we're working with other states, other civil society organizations. It always comes down to how strong the civil society organizations are, how willing they are to collaborate. We're looking at the San Francisco Collaborative Against Human Trafficking as a model for collaboration, bringing in government, survivors, civil society organizations, and we're doing the same. Working with the status of women commissions, not just locally, but statewide, and reaching out to those elected representatives we know would be supportive.
Yeah. And Cities for CEDAW is
yes, that's another civil society organization that's been working at this for 10 years, working city by city. And just recently, we've been working with the state of California. State of California has adopted a resolution in support of CEDAW in 2017. Now we're hoping to get actual legislation passed, which would be much stronger implementation. And as many of you know, we're told everything starts in California. Well, not necessarily so, but we're trying to build the momentum here on the West Coast, and so, while supporting it throughout the United States. We've had many surprises. We discovered that Kentucky adopted a resolution in support of CEDAW. So it's possible. It's just that women have let it rest, maybe far too long.
Yeah, well, we also discovered that it's a question of knowledge, of raising awareness. And most of our women simply don't know that they're behind on women's rights. And because of that, they didn't even think why. And it's our job, including through the Ratify movement, to explain to them, also to urge our representatives, senators, representatives to vote. I want to give an opportunity to Caroline to respond the second question.
Of course. Thank you, Janina, for your question. So the Women and Girls Initiative has made it a priority to support other jurisdictions that are interested in learning from our experience. I want to brainstorm and kind of help them strategize how to get something similar off the ground. And Mary, this is a great segue to this question, because Mary mentioned several of the jurisdictions that have a CEDAW ordinance or resolution in place. And some of these jurisdictions, what they see is that they have these resolutions or the ordinance in place, but it's hard to get them to the implementation stage. And so we are talking to representatives from different jurisdictions, I would say, Chanel, perhaps every other week, to help brainstorm and kind of, again, share best practices. And we have created an external packet with kind of key documents that really shows kind of how we structured our process, that includes the curriculum for our program, that is readily available for anyone here today that is interested in learning more.
Thank you so much. Before I give the floor to Alison for a question, I just wanted to thank Raven for her wonderful note in the chat, acknowledging how important it is law enforcement to be trained, to work with survivors, and to understand the needs that they have and the situation that they are in. Alison?
Yes, feminists know that a family is not necessarily a safe place. There are stories, horror stories of husbands prostituting their wives and many parents prostituting their children. However, United States law is extremely lenient with parents, allowing them to do very many things with their children because parents know best, and the parents will always have the child's best interests at heart, which we know isn't always true. What kind of hurdles have there been in California to surmount to keep parents from selling their children?
Well, we have an important organization that all of us in the collaborative and in the movement collaborate with locally, CASA, addressing the situation of foster care youth. These are children that have families, but they are foster families. And we have identified many problems with foster care. In fact, the first national study on all the flaws and weaknesses of the system that literally serves in some cases as a platform for enslavement and exploitation of children. So the first national report from a national study was made by actually the National Council of Jewish Women, making an extensive analysis on the situation. And as a result, creating CASA, Court-Appointed Special Advocates is the full name of the group, in many states, counties, in collaboration with the Junior League. So now CASA operates currently in collaboration with the dependency courts, with other organizations that provide service to foster children. However, we have to say that as opposed, for example, to Britain, we do not have guardian ad litem institution, body, service in the country. CASA is mostly, in most of the states, nonprofit organization, depending mainly on fundraising and some support. So we have to do much more. And the goal is to really have this independent body created for all children, not only for foster children. And laws that are relevant and help to regulate the matters. Of course, we have the welfare administration in the United States that takes on many of the tasks, but we do not have independent from the government and the parents institution that is only authorized and required to keep in mind and be responsible for the welfare and the interest of the child to be implemented. This is a big problem for us. We get to these cases through investigations. And thanks to the work of the San Francisco Cooperative Against Human Trafficking, but all many other organizations, the San Francisco Police Department completely revamped, restructured its work on human trafficking by creating the Special Victims Unit, where crimes against children are included, and domestic violence and family violence as well, and other crimes, in order to be able to dig deeply in such cases and see where human trafficking actually resulted from neglect, child abuse, and so forth. And I see Mary probably has something to add here.
Yes, on the local scale, the San Francisco was able to eliminate domestic violence for nearly 4 years using the CEDAW. And a lot of what CEDAW does is it protects the rights of women and provides support, childcare, family leave, and of course, equal pay. And that is essential to keep women out of poverty and to allow them to be sustainable, and most of all, to receive appropriate health care. So healthy mothers are healthy children. That's why we're supporting CEDAW and the CRC, because there is this critical nexus between women and children. So it is possible to use these ordinances once you've adopted international law. It is possible to completely eliminate domestic violence.
Yeah, well, this reminds me that San Francisco is a city that opted to the 24/7 protocol for children,
Yeah.
which allows rapid response funded through federal grants to get to reports for child trafficking and exploitation. And this includes the families. It provides separate hotline 24/7 where such cases can be reported directly to Child Protective Services and then to trigger the whole 24/7 mechanism. Alison, very good question. We are not great on that part. You're absolutely right. Very strong rights of the parents, which is generally good, but they need to be coupled with independent body, guardian ad litem, that will allow the child to assert their rights. But how we can have this if we have not ratified the Child Convention? This is how all this plays. We didn't ratify CEDAW, we lack so many things, and we didn't ratify the Child Convention. We don't have the concept of children's rights. This concept comes from the convention. We did not ratify it. So, very sad, but this is the answer. I'm looking at the by what measure, so question to Mary, by what measure was domestic violence eliminated in San Francisco? I remember it was reported.
Yeah, exactly. Transparency, it was reported. CEDAW requires reporting. It requires data collection. And there is another story about what it took to get the data. And it was applied to public city workers. And I have to say that it helped to resolve lawsuits, discrimination lawsuits brought, as I recall, by women transit workers. And that was part of the impetus for adopting CEDAW in 1998. is that by gathering data, it allows policymakers to make informed decisions. But certainly, the city keeps data on domestic violence, and the social services department, our social workers are frontline, and how well trained. We collaborate with a retired social worker from Los Angeles with expertise in severe and fatal child abuse, who is active now with the state of California and the UN. And we've talked about how essential it is to support the mothers. For example, in San Francisco, again, poverty in women. We have really pitiful stories of immigrant women on the streets who are pregnant in San Francisco. We have a women's center taking them in and working with them. But also, San Francisco is one of 5 US cities to receive UNICEF funding and support. And I have to, from what I can see, it's not entirely transparent. It's allowed the mayor to give money, provide additional money to mothers, to again, for their health, for their welfare, education. Housing is essential. Housing is nearly unaffordable here in California. So again, there are multiple, it's not a simple decision to make. There's so many factors involved, and also working with social workers and bringing them into your alliance gives you lots of data. California is keeping data. The social workers have access to that. All of these child abuse incidents have to be reported and cataloged. So that can be an indicator of domestic abuse, certainly. And a case could be made that child marriage, whatever, could be statutory rape. The Violence Against Women Act 2022 includes child marriage as statutory rape.
Yeah, well, it is also the place to say, again, responding to this important question by Alison, that education is key.
Yes.
Educating children, and this is what the San Francisco Cooperative Against Human Trafficking has been doing extensively through our program, not only educating them, but also involving them in leadership work, in activism through our Student Alliance. It has been crucial. They learn about human trafficking, about their rights, or at least the instrument to protect themselves and to report. And they also share with their counterparts, their classmates, their friends. They're very passionate advocates in our movement. And this helps. I have this story where my daughter was speaking with somebody on social media, and this is many years ago. My cousin contacted her on social media, but she didn't realize that this is him. And he didn't know that she doesn't realize that this is him. So she asked, who are you? Why are you contacting me? What are you doing? And he said, I'm knitting baskets, which was sort of a joke. But she followed up and said, why are you doing that? Why are you making baskets? And he said, because this is so on chat, because my parents asked me to. And she replied, well, they cannot make you do stuff. You have rights. This is exploitation. And he really dropped the keyboard because it was very strange to him. And he said, well, I'm afraid to refuse. And she said, I can give you contact information to report that they force you to do work. So, and this is just from conversations about human trafficking, because she knew about that. It's so important to inform the children, because it's in their nature, in their heart, social justice and this wish to do good and to help. We have a comment. Look at organization who could talk about empowerment of survivor. So I would say here we have representative of Ruby's Place, for example. It's a great organization that provides holistic service, also shelter, including for male survivors of human trafficking, but certainly for female survivors. Feel free, Ruby's Place, to jump in and give us more information. Also, Adriana, do you want to say a few words?
Yeah, thank you. I'm so happy to be here with you guys. I'm Adriana Flores. I'm actually working with Ruby's Place in Castro Valley, California. We cover most of the Bay of San Francisco. We support survivors from all the country. That's something that we are so happy. Ruby's Place has 5 shelters, main shelters. We call it Betty's Village for family and children's, means women survivors of human trafficking or domestic violence or other crimes with kids, male survivors with kids, and we have a youth village for young kids between 12 to 17, and then Hair House for young ladies 18 to 24. Also a house of acceptance for trans female survivors and LGBTQ plus, and the Casa de Ruby for male survivors. And as Antonia mentioned, we work with all the populations and we welcome everyone. We have these holistic services to provide transitional and emergency shelter for them, and supporting with housing and mental health services, and connected with other organizations. We work with all the law enforcement, collaborative with everyone around, and we are so happy about it. Thank you, Antonia.
Yeah, can you add to the chat an email or phone number where people can contact the organization?
Yeah, sure. At the beginning, I put my name and contact, but also I'm gonna put the crisis line that is 24/7 that you can reach us anytime. Thank you.
And also, I know that I see Andrew Luman is here in the meeting, and his organization works extensively with students. Children, feel free to add information to the chat, or for those that would like to contact you or jump into our conversation. Well, it's 4 o'clock Eastern time, and we are at the end of our meeting. I will give a minute to our speakers to make some sort of closing statement. And thank you all so much for being here, for being concerned about the explosion of human trafficking all over the world, and for your willingness to help. Maybe Chanel?
Thank you. Thank you all. I'm so sorry. I have another event I have to hop on at 4 o'clock. But I just wanted to say thank you so much, Antonio, for hosting this. And for all of my fellow speakers for the amazing work that you all are doing, and to everyone in the audience for the work that you all are doing also. This is an incredibly vulnerable population. And it's so wonderful to know that there are so many people out there who are looking out for them on so many different levels. So thank you again, just so honored to be able to be here.
Thank you. Carolyn?
Thank you, Antonia. I echo Chanel. Thank you for having us all. I think my closing remarks would really focus on the need for capacity building. It tends to often be kind of a discrepancy between political commitments or policy and the implementation. I think in order to move the needle and to truly make sure that our services and programs are gender responsive, we need to make sure that people know how to conduct gender impact assessments and apply a gender lens to their internal processes. So I think that's an important area to continue to invest in. For the LA County's gender impact assessment teams, we made sure that they had representatives from all across the internal divisions, IT, data analytics, HR, marketing, communications, partnerships, programs, and services. And so I think the more we can build our collective capacity to add a gender lens to how we design our government programs, the more impact we will be able to have. Thank you again for having us.
Thank you so much. Please stay in the meeting. I want a picture of all speakers. At the end, I already missed one of them. Mary?
Well, again, it's a delight and an honor to be with all of you and to share best practices, lessons learned. I think all of us want something better, a better world, and we have that vision. And I think the local global vision works. We're seeing more and more how it works. I have longevity. I've been at this a long time, and I believe you'll live a long time if you stay with this. The questions asked were just brilliant today. And I think that working with civil society and keeping it alive requires democracy, but also it requires our use of our social media skills. And certainly we're finding that that there is slow progress, and we know that we come close to reaching our goals. It's just a matter of staying with it long enough to make it happen. So look forward to working with you. I hope you'll join us at the Ratify movement or collaborate with what Antonia and the others are doing here. We have many more in our network that we'd love to include and share with you. Antonia, can you speak? Are you muted? We can't hear you.
I'm sorry, I'm muting myself because there was a siren here. So,
Yeah.
well, Rebecca and Allison, any words for?
I don't have anything else to add, just that if you'd like to learn more about SFCAT or want to get involved in it, you can get in touch with myself or Antonia. And thank you for listening.
Yes, and if you'd like to learn about the International Alliance of Women, we are at www.womenalliance.org.
Yay.
So much. Can I have your smile now for a screenshot? And one more. Thank you all. Thank you for your patience with the screenshot, and thank you for the wonderful presentations, for the very engaged and knowledgeable audience. And for those of us that continue with meetings at the Commission on the Status of Women session and forum, good luck with your events. And don't forget to enjoy the beautiful weather in New York.
Good.
And outside restaurant seating.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye for now.